Hi everyone. Well, this is a long time in coming, but I thought that maybe this would help you a little bit as you get to our next book, The Pilgrim's Progress. Hopefully you've begun reading. There's a lot to do, and in some ways it may be slower going than the Iliad, but I just want to encourage you, and what I'm doing here is I'm trying to finish up the Iliad and kind of bring closure to that book and look ahead to the Pilgrim's Progress. And what I want to do is point out a couple of parallels. Now, I have to admit there will be a couple of spoilers, but I think at this point all of us are very task-oriented and we want to get this done. And we want to do the best we can. So my goal is to help you, and if you don't want to listen to this video because you don't want any spoilers and you want to read on your own, more power to you. That's great. So we left off with book 18, and basically Achilles has been stirred from his sulk. And so by book 19, the armor from Hephaestus arrives, and it's amazing. It's just beyond words. And so what ends up happening, Achilles knows that Patroclus is dead. He knows that, Hector is to blame, and he is bent on revenge. In this book, we see a little bit of the melting of the ice between Achilles and Agamemnon, and that's interesting how that happens. It's very subtle in some ways, and at first Achilles is basically just saying, neither of us has gained from this anger, and it wasn't worth it. And what's really interesting, and I hope you'll understand my explanation here, is they blame the girl. And this is a sign of the times. It's a sign of a very misogynistic culture in many ways, and we have to recognize that. And hopefully we see how the female characters are, on one hand, they're treated horribly, but on the other hand, there is a strength there that's acknowledged. Okay, so they blame the girl. They blame Briseis, and I guess Chryseis too. But the point is, they kind of have this blame game in common, and that kind of brings them together. So Odysseus kind of swoops in, and he is the wily one. He is the counselor, and he's always thinking 2 steps ahead of everybody else. And he wants to kind of make sure that this relationship doesn't get broken again. And so he wants Agamemnon to follow through with the gifts that he has promised Achilles. And most of all, he wants a feast. He wants a feast in honor of Patroclus and Achilles, and maybe this reconciliation. But the point is, he wants Achilles to eat, because in eating he'll get energy to do what they need him to do. And so this is interesting. Then Achilles doesn't listen to them. Bottom line is he fasts, but Athena is always in the lingering in the background, and she comes and she feeds Achilles secretly nectar and ambrosia, which is the best of foods, right? And so Achilles has strength, even though he stayed up all night fasting and mourning and weeping. But then he goes out, and he is a machine of vengeance, and he's driving everyone on, cheering everyone on, and he's also cheering his horses on, kind of trying to shame his horses, and implying that the horses were the cause of Patroclus' death, and they were part of the problem. And at that moment, a really interesting thing happens. The horses speak. And this reminds me of the story in the Bible of Balaam and the donkey, his donkey, who God allows to speak to him to basically warn him. And a similar thing happens here. The horses, first of all, say it's not our fault, and they also prophesy that Achilles will die at Troy. And he doesn't like that very much. So it's this weird back and forth between Achilles and his horses. And so again, I forgot last time to talk about the titles that I give to these books, but this does help me. Maybe it'll help you. So book 19 I called Armor Arrives. Book 20 I call The Gods' Games. And so I'm trying to kind of alert you to the parallel that's happening. Zeus assembles the gods. They're all there, every single one. You wonder how the world is functioning, considering that rivers are gods and everything like that. But what is interesting is that he basically gives all of the gods the green light for a free-for-all. And so the book says, with these words, Zeus unleashed the war. So this is not the war, the Trojan War. This is the war of the gods. But they seem to kind of be excited about it. And the Greeks and Trojans have at times too, but in a weird way, because they know they're not going to die. They're just it's like a game to them. And so they pair up, and various gods are against the other gods. And on the other side, you know that Ares and Apollo and Artemis are all on the Trojan side. You know, Artemis and Apollo are twins. And so they kind of they help each other, but they also scold each other some. You also have these two rivers on the plain of Troy, the Scamander and the Simois. These two rivers are actually gods, and so they become a part of the battle as well. Now Achilles is just hacking and slashing his way, and the Trojans know they see the writing on the wall, and they are fleeing, and they can't get away fast enough, and they end up in the river, and so the river is just flooded with chariots and horses and bodies and live men thrashing around. And on the way, Achilles does meet Aeneas. Now, Aeneas is very important because we know that the Aeneid is kind of a sequel to the Iliad and the Odyssey, and it shows that Aeneas does survive. So he meets Aeneas, and Aeneas does challenge him, and he says he's not scared of him, but I think he figures he'll die. But Poseidon saves him at the last minute. And then, Apollo, again, all these gods are kind of like the coaches of this big war now. And Apollo tells Hector, don't follow Aeneas' example. Don't challenge Achilles. Don't get involved. Well, of course, Hector can't do that. It's not his nature to stay on the sidelines like Paris has done. And so basically, Achilles keeps killing Hector's brothers, half-brothers. He is just rampaging, and so that gets Hector riled up as well. Bottom line, Achilles is going to kill Hector, but Apollo saves him, whisks him away. And this is one of many times that a god steps in during these books. And at this point, Achilles just seems like he is an unstoppable force. He's invincible. Book 21, The River's Revenge. Well, one of the people that Achilles is hacking and slashing through is a river god's son. And so, the rivers kind of take notice of this, and they're in awe of Achilles. I mean, it's really kind of an amazing statement. The river basically tells Achilles, I'm shocked. But he says, stop what you're doing, Achilles. And Achilles says, no, I'm not going to. I'm going to keep, again, getting revenge for Patroclus. He doesn't have mercy on anyone. Achilles has no mercy even on these young soldiers who beg him for mercy, and he guts them. And finally, the river is pretty upset with all that's going on. And as Achilles is, crossing and wading through the chariots and dead people, then the river itself attacks Achilles, and Achilles is in a battle with the river. And you remember that from the quiz. That was the bonus question from the quiz that you took. And Achilles is running. Remember, he is the fastest of all the Greeks. He is the sprinter, and he runs from the river's surge, and it really is touch and go. But remember, Achilles has his destiny, and so basically Hera, who is the most influential of gods on Achilles' side, or the Greek side, goes to her son, Hephaestus. And so Hephaestus is, Vulcan. He's the one who has the furnaces, and he lights a fire, and that ends up stopping the river. Uh, Along the way, Poseidon and Athena support Achilles. They kind of, each one takes him over their shoulders, and kind of keep him going along. And Athena then gets into a head-to-head with Ares and then Aphrodite, and basically makes them both look really foolish. So, you can tell that the tide has totally turned now. Zeus has unleashed Athena. She can do whatever she wants, and Poseidon then challenges Apollo. Maybe Apollo realizes that, okay, it's all over, game over, and so he bows out. But it's interesting, in the poem it says that he was too well-bred to fight his uncle, his paternal uncle. Okay, so it's just interesting, the dynamics, the family dynamics here. Hera then has to confront the twin. Okay, Artemis scolds Apollo for giving up and being a wimp, but then when she challenges Hera, Hera is not at all happy. Remember, these are all Zeus's illegitimate children, and Hera never really likes him in the first place. But she rips the bow out of Artemis's hands, and it just kind of shows you a hierarchy of the gods. Now, this is going to be imitated. There's a parallel with people, the restoration of order, the order among the gods. First of all, the Trojans, they're retreating inside the city walls, and Priam is keeping the gates open so that everybody can get in. And meanwhile, Apollo is involved in tricking Achilles and kind of diverting him by pretending he is someone else, and Achilles chases him, and Apollo says, "Ha ha ha! I'm not who you think I am." And that's the end of Book 21. Book 22, a giant falls. Well, we can all see this coming. There are plenty of prophecies, and we know in Greek mythology and literature, the prophecy is going to come true, whether you do something about it or not. It's going to come true, and probably what you do is going to cause it to come true. So, Achilles, he knows he's been tricked now by Apollo, and so he turns around and heads toward the gates, and Hector is the one guarding the gates. He's guarding the city and his family and all the women in the city, and there's a real nobility here. And Hector knows, he's wise enough to know he cannot fight Achilles alone. He knows that Achilles is greater than him, but Athena tricks him because she's been given the green light from Zeus. And Priam is a spectator to this whole scene. Priam is looking down from the walls and sees what's happening and knows that Hector is doomed, and is pulling his hair out, his gray hair, He gives a long monologue talking about just basically the fleeting nature of human existence and how everything is meaningless. So it's sad, but it's a very poignant monologue. Then you have Agenor, who is, again, one of the noble Trojans, and he puts up a fight against Achilles. And what's interesting is there's a parallel here. Just about 5 pages apart, you have Agenor and you have Hector, both having monologues, or soliloquies, really. They're soliloquies, and in the process, they're talking by themselves, and then in the middle they say, "Why am I talking to myself like this?" Both of them say that same thing. And so there's this real sense of doom, foreboding. Again, the soliloquies remind us of, if you've ever read Hamlet, okay, this is the to be or not to be speech for both of them. Well, Athena finally breaks the stalemate, and, she pretends that she is Deiphobus. Deiphobus is Hector's brother, and she appears as if Deiphobus is going to help Hector. And so Hector says, "Okay, I'll go out there and fight Achilles if you'll be with me." Well, when he turns around, then Deiphobus is gone, and he's by himself, and he realizes he's been tricked. What's weird is that in the middle of this final confrontation between Hector and Achilles, Hector taunts Achilles as if he thinks he's gotten away with it. So I don't know. There's this little bit of foolishness, or just this braggadocio, this boastfulness that is such a part of the culture that even if they know they're going to die, they still boast. So, bottom line, Achilles hits Hector with his spear in the vulnerable spot between the collarbones, and Hector it doesn't sever his vocal cords, so he's still able to talk. And he basically said, with his last words, he asks Achilles to give his body to his father Priam. But Achilles is totally against it and refuses and basically spits on Hector. And so there's a line here that's very poignant. Hector says, "So this is Achilles." Maybe up to this point, Hector kind of held out the idea that Achilles is noble, and when it comes down to it, he'll do the right thing. Apart from all these boasts that both heroes are trading, these taunts and these big words. But this is foreshadowing as well, and we'll talk about this in a second. So after Hector's death, you have Priam and then Hecuba, who is Hector's mother, and Andromache, who is Hector's wife. They all respond in turn, and they have these soliloquies about this sadness that they're experiencing, which is all very, very natural and understandable. Book 23, Patroclus' funeral. This is quite an interesting episode. First of all, Achilles goes back, and his first job is to give Patroclus his freedom, because the Greeks believed that if they didn't bury the dead properly, if they didn't burn their bodies in this case, that the spirits would wander. And Patroclus does appear, from what we can tell, as a ghost to Achilles, basically saying, you need to do this. You need to free me because I can't get into Hades properly because I haven't had a proper funeral. And so, Achilles gives orders for the pyre, the funeral fire, and he charges Agamemnon with the building of the fire. And this is basically kind of coming full circle now. He is restoring Agamemnon by giving him these tasks and honoring him as the commander-in-chief. And so they build this pyre, and it burns all night. Before that, it won't start. It won't kindle. And so they need a final boost from Iris, who is kind of very busy going back and forth as the messenger of the gods. And Iris summons the winds, and they start the fire. And so then the fire burns all night. In the morning, Achilles gives commands to have the fire quenched with wine. Okay, so this is an offering. Again, wine is constantly being poured out as if the earth itself were drinking it. And then they begin the games. Okay, we had the games of the gods, and now we have the games of human beings. And there are the series of chariot races and boxing matches and wrestling matches and shot put competitions and javelin throws. And it's very interesting. At the end, Agamemnon joins the javelin contest, and everybody else gives up. Now, whether they do that simply out of deference or because they know he's the best, it doesn't really matter. He has fully been restored, and I think that that's an interesting part of this narrative to see what's happening, because that's been the drama all along. Book 24, Hector returns home. So Achilles is just still unable to sleep, and he's still mourning and thrashing. And, there's a feeling that something is unresolved. He's not getting pleasure from dragging Hector's body. He wakes up, or I should say he gets up. He can't sleep. He gets up and he drags the body around some more, and then he tries to sleep, and then he gets up and drags the body around some more in his chariot for 12 days. And for 12 days, Hector's body is not decaying and not in any way getting worse. In fact, the wounds are closing. The gods are keeping him from this absolute desecration, right? And so finally Apollo stands up. Remember, he's been Hector's champion and Troy's champion. He shames the rest of the gods and says, are you going to keep allowing this? And finally, Zeus says, we've got to get him to stop, and sends Thetis. Okay, Thetis is Achilles' mother, right? And Thetis goes down and finally tells Achilles to stop doing this. And Achilles immediately gives in, which is quite surprising too. He gives in. Maybe he's just tired of it all too, and he knows that this is not helping. Finally, Iris, again, the busy bee, she zips over to Priam and tells that Achilles will give him the body of his son if he goes to the Greek ships. So Priam goes to get the body. Now, this is like going into the lion's den, but of course, the gods are involved, and Priam has Hermes to be his bodyguard. Meanwhile, Hecuba, his wife, is trying to keep Priam from going to the Greek ships because she thinks it's all a trick, and then Priam will be killed. And so in this book, constantly you see the women trying to persuade the men not to do something that they feel fated to do. So there's this interesting dialogue, and it's very much masculine and feminine, and it's something to pay attention to. Priam then scolds or rebukes his other sons for not dying. He basically says, "You're a bunch of pretty boys. You didn't fight hard enough, and so you're part of the problem." Well, when Priam arrives, Achilles sees him, sees what he has risked, and he is moved, and he basically is on the verge of relenting. And then Priam kind of pushes a little bit, and it's interesting because Achilles, again, his nature rears its ugly head, and he basically says, "No, wait a minute, old man, I could kill you right now," that kind of thing. And Priam gets afraid. So whenever somebody is afraid in this book, I find it very interesting. Finally, there's this moment of absolute harmony between Achilles and Priam, and Achilles gives Priam the body and acknowledges this man who has lost so much, his nobility. And in the same way, Priam acknowledges Achilles as godlike. And so Achilles lets him sleep at his home outside because he can't let Agamemnon see that he has Priam in his tent or there'll be trouble. And so, he sleeps there, but then Hermes, in the morning wakes him up and says, "You can't keep sleeping here. You're going to be killed." And so finally Priam returns with Hector's body, and basically the whole city of Troy comes out to see Hector returning. And this is the end of the book with Hector's funeral pyre. So you have Patroclus' funeral pyre in book 23, and then you have Hector's in book 24. There's parallelism, and epics do this. They'll go from one side to the other side. They go back and forth, and they want you to see parallelism. And that's one of the most amazing things about this book, is its even-handedness. You see Trojans and Greeks on equal terms in many cases, and they're gods on both sides. Now, I just want to kind of end looking forward to Pilgrim's Progress. Hopefully you started reading. You understand that the main character, Christian, is fleeing the city of destruction. Right away, I think of Aeneas, and he's going to be fleeing the city of destruction because Troy is going to be destroyed, the Trojan horse, and Aeneas is one of the evacuees, and then he ends up starting the Roman Empire. Well, Christian is not some warrior or hero, but he is fleeing. He's fleeing the destruction, and he's on his way to a place that seems very shadowy and unfamiliar to him. And we learn as we go that it's a place where God is, and that's what I'm going to say. Some things that Pilgrim's Progress has in common with the Iliad is you see wanderers going to the homes of other characters, and there is either hospitality or there's a lack of hospitality. And that's something that's very interesting because the Greeks valued hospitality so much. But I want you to see how Christian responds to that, as opposed to, the Greeks. Think of Menelaus being betrayed because he was the host and he was taken advantage of. So think of Christian and the other characters in that story and how they respond when rules are broken. Another thing you can look for is how death is treated in this story. What is death all about? And there are many archetypes. Because this is an allegorical story, everything has meaning. All the characters' names are very specific because they represent some kind of person or some teaching. And so Christian is trying to navigate, he's trying to continue his journey, but he's constantly being sidetracked or confused or encouraged. There are positive voices and negative voices. I think that you have a similar thing in the Iliad. whether it's Achilles, you have all the counsel that he's receiving, or whether it's Hector, all the different people who are counseling him to do this or that. And so, the goal. What is the goal of Hector? And what is the goal of Christian? And how can we compare them? Because that's what you have to do with your culminating paper. You have to be looking at a Bible metaphor, which is an archetype. It's one of those basic patterns. And you have to look at how it was treated in pre-Christian times and how it is changed through Christ, especially as we look at this post-Reformation text. So that's all I'm going to say, because we're already at 25 minutes and you're sick of hearing me talk. But I hope that this does give some of you a review so that you can get a grasp of your paper that's coming. And I just thank you for all your effort. Have a great weekend.